Hello students, the topic which we will be dealing today is a diuretic agent. This is a very important as well as an interesting topic. Now, before going into the seminar proper, let us have an overview of what are all the things we will be learning in this seminar. First, I would be starting with the classification of diuretic agent. In order to have a closer view, I have zoomed in and placed the classification. Then followed by which we will be going into the mechanism action of each of the agent, starting with the loop diuretic. First, I would be explaining the normal physiology and then the mechanism action of the drug along with its associated effect. I would be just explaining one particular effect over here. Then we would be moving to the thiazide, its normal physiology of the distal convoluted tubule, followed by a drug acting, that is the thiazide. Then we will be moving into the ENaC inhibitor and the aldosterone antagonist. Then we will be moving to the CA inhibitors. Then we will be going into the osmotic diuretics, and with that we will be ending the seminar. Now with that, let us start the seminar. So why do we give a diuretic agent? So diuretic agent are drugs which will cause loss of both the water as well as the solute. They have multiple roles to play, starting from heart failure as well as hypertension. So basically they will be causing loss of water along with the solute. But if you actually see, already the physiology of a nephron is fixed. That is, we know where the maximum amount of solute will be coming out, where the next level of solutes will be coming out. So a drug which will be acting at the diuretic agent, though the drug might be very powerful in inhibiting that particular transporter, in spite of which there is a particular cutoff until which it can inhibit, it can cause an effect at the solute. That is, in the thick ascending limb, you have 25% of a solute which are being taken in. Now a drug which is going to act over here will cause 25% of the inhibition of the, can cause at the maximum 25% of inhibition of the solute absorption. But if we see at the same time the distal convoluted tubule, it has a role in absorption of only 10% of the solute. Now, so a drug which will be acting over there will be having inhibition of at the maximum 10% of the solute absorption. Then the convoluted tubule, where we have 2% of the solute being absorbed. Now a drug which is going to act over here at the maximum can have 2% of the solute to be inhibited from absorption. So this basically means there is efficacy of the diuretic which are being determined. That is, one is going to be very high efficacy, second is going to be medium efficacy, and last is going to be the poor efficacy or the weak agent. Now let us see into the classification detail. First and foremost are the high efficacy diuretic or the loop diuretic agent. These will be inhibiting the sodium, potassium and 2-chloride co-transporter. The drugs which are under this are furosemide, bumetanide, toracimide and ithacranic acid. Next, the medium efficacy agents or the agents which are acting at the distal convoluted tubule. The drugs which are under this include hydrochlorothiazide, chlorothiazide, bendroflumethiazide, benzdiazide, and then the thiazide like agents which are the chlorthalidone, metolazone and the indapamide. Then we are moving into the weak or the adjunctive agents. Now weak or adjunctive agents, what are all the drugs which are actually falling into it? These include the aldosterone antagonist, under which comes the spironolactone eplerenone, the inhibitor of the sodium epithelial sodium channels or the ENaC channels, under which comes the amiloride and the triamtrene. Next is the carbonic anhydrase inhibitor, under which comes the acetazolamide, methazolamide. Next, the adenosine inhibitors or the adenosine A1 receptor antagonist, under which comes the rolophilin. And lastly, the osmotic diuretic, under which comes the mannitol, sorbitol and glycerol. Now out of these agents, you have the adenosine inhibitor and antagonist which are currently not used. It has been withdrawn because of its nephrotoxicity. So we are not going to discuss about that. Other than that, let us venture into the detailed mechanism action of each of these agents. So first and foremost, let us understand the normal functioning of the solute at the level of the thick ascending limb. Okay. So in the thick ascending limb, there is a co-transporter present over here. On the luminal side, this is colored yellow because just representing the urine, and the interstitial blood, this is colored the red representing the interstitial side. Okay. Now clear? These are all specially made graphical illustrations of exam just to make you understand this concept. These are not taken from any books. These are self-made for you to understand the concepts better. So this sodium, potassium and 2-chloride co-transporter first of all causes absorption of the sodium chloride and 2-chloride. As soon as it is getting absorbed, okay, there will be occurring the increase in positive charge inside. So you are understanding, right? That is sodium, potassium are being absorbed. So that basically means more amount of positive things there inside. This basically means you cannot have more amount of positive inside because there should be a homeostasis as well as the equilibrium. So something needs to be lost. So water lost, the potassium are lost. Why is potassium lost? Because we have the potassium which is a predominant intracellular ion. So you have the potassium which are present more. So these potassium are lost, then these potassium are excreted. Now this means the potassium are lost, that means there is a loss of positive ion again. So in order to match this loss of positive ion, you have gain of positive charge again, but this is using the passive transport. So we have the gain of calcium as well as the magnesium using the passive transport. So this is the entire normal physiology of the solute movement at the level of thick ascending limb. Okay. Now let us see how does this particular physiology changes in the presence of a loop diuretic. So when a loop diuretic actually acts, now this loop diuretic is going to inhibit the sodium, potassium and 2-chloride co-transporter. So that is the co-transporter target over which the loop diuretic will be acting and it will be inhibiting. Clear? Now this basically means there will not be increased amount of positive charge inside, because what did I say? Generally this sodium, potassium which comes in, it will cause increased amount of charge. For that only the potassium will be lost, right? Now there will not be any increase in charge over here. Now that basically means the potassium are not being lost. Now if the potassium are not being lost, that means the calcium and magnesium will not be passively absorbed, right? So first and foremost, the loop diuretic will be inhibiting the sodium, potassium as well as 2-chloride. That basically means the sodium, potassium will be, the sodium importantly will be lost over here. Okay, the sodium as well as the potassium will be lost over here. Now that basically means the potassium will not be excreted also outside because there is no compensatory excretion of potassium which is required. That basically means the calcium and magnesium will not be passively absorbed. But if you actually see, this actually causes hypokalemia also as its side effect. Now you will be asking, yes sir, how it is going to cause hypokalemia? Because the hypokalemia as well as the metabolic alkalosis which these agents are caused are not due to the effect at this particular thick ascending limb level, rather the effect at the collecting tube level. So let us go into the collecting tube and how it is going to work. In the collecting tube, this is just to understand why does this particular agent causes hypokalemia as well as metabolic alkalosis. Okay. Now, if you see the collecting tubule, there are broadly two types of cells. One is the principal cells and another is the type 2 intercalated cells. The main difference is that the principal cells will be having the ENaC and the ROMK channels, and the intercalated cells will be having the H plus ATPase pump. Now, this is again the normal physiology. There occurs an influx of sodium. So the influx of sodium will be there inside. So once the sodium is actually influxed, that basically means the membrane will get depolarized. Now, if the membrane gets depolarized, in order to match up the increased amount of charge inside, the potassium will be excreted outside, right? You know potassium is a positive charge. Let us say potassium is not available in that much large amount. Now you can have one more cation which is being excreted, which is again H plus. So that basically means in order to match the influx of sodium, you have the potassium as well as the hydrogen which are being eliminated outside, right? Now let us see what occurs in the presence of a loop diuretic. The loop diuretic, as I said, is going to inhibit the sodium, potassium and 2-chloride co-transporter. That basically means the sodium as well as potassium are being lost. That basically means there will be more amount of influx of sodium to the collecting tubule. That basically means again the more amount of sodium will be entering into the ENaC channels. In order to compensate this more amount of positive charge, there will be more amount of potassium as well as hydrogen ion which will be excreted out. Potassium through the ROMK channels and hydrogen ion through the H plus ATPase pump, right? So what does ROMK stands for? Written over here, stands for renal outer medullary potassium channels, and the ENaC stands for epithelial sodium channels, right? So that is how the loop diuretic causes hypokalemia as well as metabolic alkalosis. Alkalosis because hydrogen ions are being lost. Now let us go into the next group of agent, which are the thiazide. I said right, thiazide are medium efficacy. Why? Because it will be acting in the role of distal convoluted tubule and you have maximum of 10% of the solute which are being filtered at this particular level. That is the sodium which are being filtered at this particular level, right? Now let us first understand the normal functioning of a distal convoluted tubule, right? So in the distal convoluted tubule, you have 3 ions which are being pulled in, right? One is the sodium, chloride as well as the calcium. The sodium and chloride through the sodium chloride co-transporter, the calcium using the TRPVS channels, that is the transient receptor potential voltage channels, right? So these TRPVS channels are very highly selective for calcium. So these are also pulled in. Now in order to match up the sodium which are being pulled in, you have, and as well as the calcium which are being pulled in, the calcium and sodium exchanger will be getting activated. So whatever calcium which are being pulled in will be eliminated outside and then the sodium will be taken in. So this is the normal physiology which is occurring over here. Now let us see what occurs in the presence of a thiazide. In the presence of a thiazide, first of all, where do thiazide act? Let's be clear about it. It acts at the level of sodium chloride co-transporter. So that is the only place where thiazide is going to act. As soon as thiazide are going to act over here, you have increased amount of sodium which are being present in the lumen. That basically means our first and foremost requirement is done. That is sodium which are being lost in the urine. As soon as sodium are being lost, now you understand that there will be decreased amount of sodium on the inner side. So if there is a decreased amount of sodium in the inner side, in order to match up this decreased amount of sodium, you have the sodium as well as calcium exchanger getting stimulated. So there occurs a stimulation of the sodium calcium exchanger. So there will be more amount of sodium which are being coming in and the calcium which are being excreted outside. So in addition to the stimulation of this, there will also occur a stimulation of the TRPVS channel. So more amount of calcium will be taken in. That basically means there will be occurring what is known as the hypercalcemia. So this is the reason why thiazide causes hypercalcemia. But it also causes hypokalemia as well as metabolic alkalosis. You all know the reason, right? It is not because of the effect at this particular level, but rather it is due to the effect at the level of collecting tubule, which I have already explained for the loop diuretic. Now let us go to the next group of agent, that is the drug which are acting at the collecting tubule, which are the ENaC inhibitor as well as the aldosterone antagonist. Partly I have explained above, but let me just have a small recap, a quick recap over here. So collecting tubule consists of two types of cells. One are the principal cells, another is the type 2 intercalated cells. The main difference between this is the principal cells contains the ENaC and the ROMK channels, whereas the intercalated cells contains the H plus ATPase. You also have over here a effect of aldosterone over here. How? Aldosterone acts as a role of aldosterone receptor which are present in the cytoplasm. After aldosterone binds with the aldosterone receptor, they move into the nucleus and then that causes expression of genes. So what is the particular gene it is going to express as the ENaC gene. That basically means from the gene, that is the DNA, you have the mRNA which are being produced, and from the mRNA you have the ENaC channels which are being synthesized. So there will be occurring increased amount of ENaC expression if the aldosterone is going to stimulate the aldosterone antagonist. So if the more amount of ENaC channels which are being stimulated, that means more amount of influx of sodium are going to take place. That means more amount of potassium will be getting lost, right? So this is the normal physiology of a collecting tubule. Now let us go into the detail of what occurs in the presence of ENaC inhibitor as well as the aldosterone antagonist. In the presence of a ENaC inhibitor, which is the triamptrine as well as the amiloride, you have an inhibition of the influx of the sodium. As soon as the inhibition of influx of sodium occur, there will not be occurring a full amount of depolarization. That is, the membrane does not get fully depolarized. If the membrane does not get fully depolarized, that basically means you don't have the potassium required to be lost as well as the hydrogen required to be lost. The potassium using the ROMK channels and the hydrogen using the H plus ATPase channels are not required to be lost over here. So this is the main mechanism of action by which the ENaC inhibitors occur. So that basically means if the potassium are not going to get lost, these are nothing but known as potassium sparing diuretics. So potassium is getting spared from being lost. How do aldosterone antagonists act? Which is a spironolactone. Those are going to inhibit other level of aldosterone, right? So aldosterone antagonists are going to inhibit the aldosterone receptor. So if the aldosterone receptors are going to get inhibited, that means there will not be occurring increased amount of expression of the ENaC channels. So if the increased amount of expression of the ENaC channels are not occurring, then again it is similar to that of inhibition of the ENaC. Those effects will be occurring. So that is the potassium sparing effect will be occurring. So that is why ENaC inhibitor as well as the aldosterone antagonist are together known as the potassium sparing diuretic. We learned that the previous agents, that is the loop diuretic as well as the thiazide, causes hypokalemia. These are potassium sparing. So these can be used complementary. Next, we are going to discuss about carbonic anhydrase inhibitor. Remember, these act at the level of proximal convoluted tubule. Now you will be asking, sir, proximal convoluted tubule, we have learned that the maximum amount of sodium absorption occurs at this particular point of place. That basically means if a drug which is going to act at the level of proximal convoluted tubule, it should be having the maximum efficacy, right? There is a high efficacy, but that is not the case. We are learning carbonic anhydrase are under the category of a weak or the adjunct agents. Why it is so? It is so because in spite of acting over here, first and foremost, it does not act at the level of transporter. It acts at the level of an enzyme, that is carbonic anhydrase. Second is, in spite of a drug which is acting over here, if the sodium is getting lost, you still have the loop of Henle as well as the distal convoluted tubule as well as the collecting tubule vacant, that is without any drugs. That means these agents are going to perform its activity. So you lose over here, but all those are going to get absorbed downstream. That is why a drug, in spite of acting at the level of proximal convoluted tubule, will not be attaining very high efficacy. Now let us go and first understand the normal functioning of proximal convoluted tubule. So in the proximal convoluted tubule, you have the filtered bicarbonate which are coming. These bicarbonate gets attached with the hydrogen to form H2CO3. The carbonic anhydrase in the luminal end causes breakdown of into H2O and CO2. CO2 diffuses into the epithelial cells. This CO2 again get attached to the H2O using the same carbonic anhydrase which is in the cytoplasm end to form the H2CO3. Then this H2CO3 breaks down into H plus and HCO3 minus. The HCO3 is being absorbed along with the sodium using the Na plus and HCO3 minus symporter. But the H plus which is being produced over here gets shuffled up for the sodium. Sodium gets in and the hydrogen gets out. So this is a sodium hydrogen antiporter, right? Now let us see what occurs in the presence of a carbonic anhydrase inhibitor. Now you have a drug which is going to inhibit the carbonic anhydrase. As soon as carbonic anhydrase is getting inhibited, that basically means there is not going to occur the fusion, or that is a breakdown of the H2CO3 into H2O and CO2. That basically means there is going to occur increased amount of H2CO3 on the lumen side, right? These are the luminal end. Now let us see what occurs inside the cell. Same thing over here, that is the HC are not going to get act. That basically means H2O and CO2 are not going to get fused. There is going to occur a decreased amount of bicarbonate on the inside. That basically means the bicarbonate, if it is going to be less in the inside, it is not going to get split into H plus and HCO3 minus. If this is not going to get split, that basically means Na and H plus antiporter does not have a H plus for putting out so that sodium can be taken in. That means sodium will be increased on the outside because you need this H plus for this antiporter to function. That means the sodium will be lost. So this is how the carbonic anhydrase inhibitor functions. Now let us go into the last group of agent, which are the osmotic diuretic agent. So this osmotic diuretic, the name itself says what is it, how does it function? It is going to function using the osmosis. Osmosis is when you have a high concentration on one side, in order to match up this concentration, there will occur the fluid movement. So you give the mannitol is going to enter into the luminal side. So there is going to be more amount of mannitol on the lumen side. In order to match up this increased amount of mannitol on the lumen side, the water will be moving out, right? And the water will be pumped out, right? This again acts as a level of proximal convoluted tubule, and towards until the loop of Henle also it might have its effect. So with that, we are going to end this seminar. Thank you so much.